Fine. In that case, welcome everyone to today's meeting of the panel. If you have any technical difficulties during the meeting, then please contact the Democratic Services Officer on call, who will attempt to assist you. Today's officer on call is James Clapson, and the number to call is 577 200. I would ask participants, when you're not speaking, please mute your microphone. Microphones must only be on if the participant has been granted permission to speak. And to gain my permission to speak, please indicate on the chat, and I will then make a note and call you when it is your turn. Would everyone present please ensure that their mobile phones are turned to silent and that they are not used to make or receive phone calls whilst the meeting is in progress. Please also refrain from checking your emails and ensure that you're in a quiet room for the duration of the meeting. Please note that this meeting is being live streamed for members of the public. The meeting will also be recorded and will be subsequently broadcast on the internet. Can I ask that members of the panel confirm that they are present in the meeting when I call out your name? Councillor Curry?
Here, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Curry is substituting for Councillor Campbell. I spoke to Councillor Campbell at the weekend, and I'm sorry to tell members he's very, very unwell at the moment. So I'm sure you'll join with me in sending our best wishes to him. Councillor Boyd.
Present, Chair.
Councillor Coleman-Cook.
Present, Chair.
Councillor Hopkinson.
Yeah, I'm here, Chair. Thank you.
Councillor Huxley.
I think I'm representing Councillor Huxley, Chair. Good evening. Councillor Ara.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Keane. Councillor Keane? No. Okay. Councillor Patmore?
Here, Chair.
Councillor Paul Moore?
Here, Chair.
Councillor Linda Piper? Councillor Linda Piper? No. Councillor Rattigan? No. Councillor Roper? I can see you, Councillor Roper. I can't hear you, but we know you're here. Councillor Piper, you've just joined us, yes?
I'm having problems with my internet as well.
Okay.
Here, Chair.
Okay, all right, fine, gotcha. Councillor Rattigan? No. Councillor Rozecki?
Here, Chair.
And Councillor Scott?
Here, Chair.
Lovely. Speaking under 20.1, I've not received any requests to speak under 20.1. Are there any members present who wish to speak under 20.1? No, I can't see anyone indicating. I've not received any request for public speaking. So moving on to the substantive part of the agenda. Agenda item number 1, apologies for absence. Apologies were received by from Councillor Campbell, substituted by Councillor Curry, and Councillor Ara, you are substituting for Councillor Huxley? Okay, thank you.
That's right, yes.
Okay, fine. Agenda item 2, any declarations of interest? I can't see anybody indicating. Agenda item 3, minutes of the previous meeting. To approve the minutes of the Overview and Scrutiny Panel meeting held on the 24th of November 2020, a copy of which was attached to the agenda pack. Could I have a proposer for those minutes, please?
I'd like to propose that, Chair. Paul Moore.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. And a seconder?
I'll second that, Chair. Councillor Coleman-Cook.
Thank you, Councillor Coleman-Cook. Members, we've got a proposal and a second. Are they agreed? I can't see any objections. I see lots of people nodding, so I'll take those as approved. Thank you very much. Agenda item 4, the 2021-22 budget. I will now call upon Tim Willis to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair.
As Councillor Yates said to Cabinet, this budget has been set within the context of significant change for local government and for local government finance. COVID-19 has forced us to focus on the very short term and has been a drain on reserves as well as a drain on council finance, council staff reserves. In some ways, this is a COVID-free budget. The budget gap is almost all due to domestic issues such as pay and contractual inflation and increased waste disposal costs. And there were some projected reductions in government grants also, but nothing that was specifically COVID related. This is because we've treated COVID as essentially having a one-off impact, albeit one-off in 2021 and 21-22 as well as in 2021. Members will recall that fees and charges have already passed through this panel and been approved by Council. I'd also remind members that any budget recommendations from OSP that have a cost or reduced income should have a funding source. OSP can make such recommendations to Cabinet, but I would be advising Cabinet as Section 151 officer that they should not be accepted unless a funding source is identified for referral on to Council. I'd also repeat what Councillor Yates said in his introduction at Cabinet, that in paragraph 13.6.1, the increase in average rent between this year and next year is £1.98, not £1.89, as the report states. I'm happy to answer any questions from members.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Mr. Willis. Yeah, I mean, I think the point's well made about any recommendations that come from here. We've got to say where alternative funding would come from. I think also it's fair to say that, as usual, you've been assiduous in trying to keep members informed all the way through the budget making process. And I know you've held various workshops and we've had briefings and so on. So hopefully members tonight won't have too many surprises to throw your way. But members, do you have any questions of Mr. Willis or any comments to make? Sorry, Councillor Rozecki. Sorry for I had difficulty getting the chat up. So, Councillor Rozecki.
That's all right, Chair. I have difficulty myself with it. Just a quick comment. Again, Mr. Willis and his team have done a sterling job in these trying times, and I'd like to pass on our thanks for all the sterling work that his team have done. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Rozecki. I'm sure that's echoed by everybody. I'm sure the Conservative group would feel exactly the same way. Councillor Linda Piper.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to pass on my thanks to Mr. Willis and his team, a bit like Councillor Rozecki has just done. It was interesting. Item 4, where it says resident views and corporate priorities, that there was only 57% of who was asked was surprised that the council received such a small proportion of their council tax, and that information perhaps should be more available to the people of Thanet who think that they pay too much council tax. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Piper. Anyone else have any comments? I've got just a couple of queries, really. The first is at 13.7, where to do with the HRA, talk about adjustments made between accounting basis and funding basis, and it's nearly £500,000. Could you explain what that is, Mr. Willis, please?
Thank you, Chair. Let me just find the...
Yes, 13.7.
Okay, so it's in the table. And it's right at near the bottom, the 479,000.
That's it, yeah.
Yeah. Yes, this is required in order to show the complete picture within the HRA. It's true of the general fund as well, but it's normally invisible when it comes to the general fund. But we have to show the complete picture in the HRA. It's to reflect things about different valuations of assets within the housing revenue account. And that depending on the funding basis of those assets, we have to reflect the different numbers, which is the adjusting figure of 479,000. It doesn't have a material impact on the overall bottom line as to what needs to be covered from rent income, but we have to include it. I believe this question's been asked in previous years, and
I might have asked it.
so I should probably have a more comprehensive explanation to hand, but I'm happy to provide a more comprehensive explanation as to the specific accounting treatment and the breakdown of the 479,000, if that would help, Chair.
Okay, I mean, I would be interested. I'm not sure if other members would, but I would be interested in seeing that. But I was more interested in finding out it didn't have any material impact. I've got another question, 11.7, talking about the HRA major repairs reserve. Table there would indicate that the reserve stood at 15.5 million on the 31st of March 2020. And they're planned to reduce to 384,000 by the 31st of March 2022. So the question there is that reduction and the small amount that's left prudent? But following on from that, the table that I've referred to there indicates a movement in 21-22 of 7.676 million. But at Annex 3, it suggests that 11.986 million is being used from Master Repairs Reserve. So could you clarify those 2 points for me, please?
Okay, the first point, yes, we're using the Major Repairs Reserve substantially over this year and next year. I'd say that this year it also reflects the planned capital programme. So the reality is likely to be, because of the level of slippage, that a lot more will fall into 21-22. It will chase the spending. But the reality is we are using a substantial amount of that reserve in order to fund the significant investment plan that we have for the housing revenue account stock, in particular the tower blocks. It is a low level that's left at 384. In fact, overall, the level of reserves in the HRA is reducing substantially, if you look at that table. And we know that, and we know that for the next few years, the HRA will be running at a deficit as well. But both the Major Repairs Reserve and the overall level of reserves within the HRA won't go below prudent levels before they are projected to start, the HRA moves back into surplus, and that's so that we can start replenishing those reserves. But it's a worthwhile point to make that I will regularly inform members that general fund reserves were low before COVID and they've only got lower. Well, that's because in the past the HRA has been in a healthier position, but with a combination of bringing East Kent Housing in-house, the discovery of a number of aspects of the single system, and the condition of the stock has led us to require a significant input of reserves of resources into the HRA, and that's a consequence of that. On the second point of the apparent discrepancy between the figure for 21-22 in that table 7 and Annex 3, did you say?
Annex 3, yeah.
Which is the HRA capital programme.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing at the bottom it's got the funding breakdown of.
That's it. Yeah. Yeah.
And for 21-22 it says 11.986.
That's it. Yeah.
I don't know is the answer.
Okay. It's all right. It's only the odd 4 million difference, so yeah.
I could
not too bothered.
I could hazard a guess that programme incorporates some slippage from 2021,
right? And
so it's inflated by the overall capital programme spend is inflated by the fact of inclusion of the slippage from 2021, and so the use. It's a bit referring to the point I made at the beginning that the Major Repairs Reserve, which follows the spending, has been brought into that figure in the annex that reflects to 2021. But that might not be accurate because I don't have the breakdown of that 11.9 million before me, but I can provide that subsequent to this meeting.
Yeah, again, I'd be interested in that. Thank you, Mr. Willis. Thank you very much. My final point is that the report actually states that the 151 officer, your good self, had an optimistic view and a pessimistic view of how COVID might impact. And then it goes on to say that you've taken the middle ground. So 2 points really. The first is, your level of confidence in making that decision. But do you have any idea what the budget would have looked like had you taken the pessimistic view?
I think pessimistic view would have been that, as the report says in paragraph 2.4, even though we know there's now a vaccine, it turns out that vaccine take-up is slow, and maybe a lot of people decide not to take it up, so that doesn't diminish the level of infections, and it means that there's further local outbreaks. But also the wider macroeconomic impact of COVID is really significant. So it has a big impact on unemployment and business failures within Thanet. That would have a consequential impact on our business rates. It would increase our council tax support payments and reduce the amount of income we generate from business rates, council tax, and fees and charges. The other pessimistic view would be that there isn't an increase in visitor numbers. In fact, visitor numbers are just as low as they were in 2020, going into our sort of summer season in 21-22. If all of those things came into play, whilst I would expect there to be more government funding to support that impact of COVID than they've already announced, that might not happen. So the pessimistic view is, no, what they're going to pay us, that's all they're going to pay us, that they've promised us, and nothing more. Mm-hmm. If all of those things came to pass, what I would have to fall back on is the reserves that we'll be carrying into 21-22 from 2021, because the council made a decision to identify £3 million worth of our own earmarked reserves to plug the COVID gap in 2021 this year. And it turns out that we don't need to use all of those reserves that we thought we had to this year. We'll be able to call upon that next year as a backstop. And only then would we start eating into what was the very low level of reserves that we had even before COVID. If that happened as well, then we would be having to have an emergency budget, and we'd have to be finding additional savings on at least a one-off basis in 21-22 before we resorted to anything worse than that. So that's the pessimistic view. The reason why I'm not as pessimistic as that, although I don't want to be accused of being an optimist,
never let it be said, Mr. Willis,
is that the reality is the vaccine is rolling out, and we've had some promises from the government about the speed with which that will be rolled out. I think we generally feel that the level of new infections is falling both in Thanet and in the country at large, even though we're still in probably the worst moment in terms of the number of hospitalizations and deaths. And so many of us would have been affected by people who have been unfortunate enough to contract the COVID-19. I think that from this point onwards, things should begin to ease. And I think that's generally the perception that we're receiving from government, who are in the best position to know. So I think things are going to improve slowly during 21-22. And remember, that doesn't start until April. And even by April, we would hope that things would have improved a bit. The other thing, I think, and this is tentative, I think that we've been less affected by COVID than quite a few other places around the country and around Kent. That's partly been because of our relative resilience of our underlying financial position. And I don't mean by that our reserves level, because we had low reserves anyway. But what I would say is that we don't have the sort of characteristics that local authorities that have been really hit by COVID have been things like town centre car parks, where they're really dependent upon income from town centre car parks. And we don't have a huge town centre car park income generation. We obviously have town centres and we obviously have car parks, but our level of income hasn't been affected by anything like the magnitude of some other local authorities not too far from Thanet. And the other thing is, we chose not to invest in commercial ventures. Yeah. We chose that, and I would say sort of modestly on behalf of the council that we did that because we didn't have the option to do it anyway. We didn't have the risk appetite to do it, and we didn't have the money to do it. But I like to tell people that Thanet chose that because it was a wise decision to do that. We thought it would be folly to go down that route, and now COVID has proven that to be the case. Where a lot of local authorities have taken a hammering on their commercial rent income assumptions, and they get no government support for that income loss. So I think looking forward, I think we can be comforted by that fact that even if COVID continues to affect us longer than we thought, then we won't be hit in those ways. But also, the very thing that sometimes holds us back, the seasonality of our income, not just fees and charges, but more generally the impact it has on businesses and the ability for our local businesses to thrive and to create employment. The thing that holds us back sometimes, the seasonality, but I'm hopeful that next summer we will see a big uptick in visitors, assuming the vaccine rolls out and assuming that travel restrictions are more relaxed. They're going to relax first on domestic travel. And if people have less money to spend and they're looking for somewhere to go, I'm hopeful that our economy will benefit from a significant uptick in staycations. Now, when I'm not building a budget on that assumption, but I think that is a reasonable assumption to make if you're thinking of the optimistic scenario.
Sure. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Willis. I think, yeah, very true. And I think your points are well made about neighbouring authorities and decisions they may have made. And they don't need to know why we made ours, do they? So that's okay. We just claim we were clairvoyant and leave it at that. So thank you for that. Councillor Boyd, you've got a question or a comment to make.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it just seems more of a trivial question, really, in relation. I think all the big questions have been done. But on paragraph 15, table 9, I was just curious as to why the one-bedroom house social rent average is higher than the affordable rent, comparing the trends for all of the other accommodations. I just wondered why it was a bit of a peculiar one compared to the others.
Okay, I don't know. Can anybody answer that question?
I know Bob Porter's on the call, so I don't know if he's had a clue.
Oh, yeah. Thrown the hospital past, Mr. Wood. Well done. Bob, are you there?
I am here, Chair. Yeah.
Well done. Well
so,
done.
which paragraph are we?
Let me just talk for a moment, Bob, and it might help you. Yes.
Go on then.
So it's table 9 in paragraph 15 of the report. And it shows that the affordable rents, as you'd expect, would be higher than social rents in every instance. And it appears, and this could be an error, it appears that a one-bedroom house, and I don't even know if we have any one-bedroom houses, but a one-bedroom house, affordable rent is lower than the social rent figure, as Councillor Boyd has pointed out, which does seem rather odd.
It does, and Fred, I don't know the answer to that either. Yeah, my first question would be: do we have a one-bedroom house anywhere? I suspect that possibly we don't, but I'm happy to go away and have a look at that and clarify that for you, Councillor Boyd. Does seem an anomaly because generally affordable rents are higher than social rents.
And Bob, I'll take that up and get back to Councillor Boyd because it's my responsibility. I just thought you might know. I wasn't trying to.
Yeah, no, sorry, I don't know.
Yeah, top marks, Councillor Boyd, for stumping the experts. Well done. Okay, members, I can't see anybody else. Oh, sorry, Councillor Hopkinson, you like to ask a question? Sorry.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just a couple of related questions. I mean, I'm sure this information is available to us somewhere, but I just want, because we've mentioned a few times the fact that reserves are low, I just wondered if you can remind us of the figure of that. I've got in my memory vaguely the figure of about 20 million, but I wonder if you can remind us of what that is. And also related to that, you mentioned the 3 million that was earmarked from the reserves, but we didn't need to spend in the end. I'm sure this has been considered already, but I just wonder if what the views are on, because we are proposing to increase rents, what views there are on using that 3 million not to increase rents. I'm not sure what the saving is, the total saving is from that increase. I know it's only a small one, but I wondered if we could just get a response on that.
Yes, Chair,
Yes.
I can.
Mr. Willis, yeah.
Yep. First of all, the reserves are set out in Table 7 in paragraph 11.7, both the general fund and the housing revenue account reserves, and they show a use of reserves during the 2 years, both on the general fund and the housing revenue account. What I'd point out there is that the movement in 2021, as I alluded to, the use of general fund reserves is 1.7 million, not 3 million. And that's because back in September, we thought it would be 3 million, but then we got more government funding than we thought. And the cost of COVID fell a little bit. So that meant that we will only need to draw upon 1.7 million. The working assumption in this report and in the budget monitoring report, which was also on the cabinet agenda, is that we know that, we've recognised that, and we will need to make a decision about what to do about that, but not now. We will wait to see how COVID plays out and what the provisional outturn position looks like in this financial year. And that's a reasonably prudent approach, which I entirely support. What it means is that some of those decisions that when council went through the reserves list and come up with £3 million worth, what it would mean would be we reversed out of some of those decisions, which would be the working assumption. So where we said we'd make a saving on one particular earmark reserve in order to fund the 3 million, we could say, well, we won't do that after all. So it's not creating more money necessarily. It might just be reversing some decisions that we made. But of course, that's up to council. It will be up to council to make that decision at the time. My assumption that I've advised in this report is that we hold those reserves because of the level of uncertainty and because of the level of underlying reserves anyway. We hold those reserves as protection against things going bad that we can't currently anticipate. But that is still recognised. It's still there in a COVID shortfall reserve, and everybody can see it. And then we'll make a conscious decision about what to do about that in the next few months. As regards to the point about rents, well, the 3 million use of reserves is general fund reserves, not the housing revenue account reserves. And rents are within the housing revenue account. And as you can see in the HRA reserves, they've gone down significantly from the three reserves there you can see at the start of this financial year, which amount to about 25 million. They're down to about less than 4 million at the end of next year forecast. So there isn't any headroom in any case to consider. And in fact, when I've advised this panel that the HRA is running at a deficit for a number of years before it returns to surplus, well, we've had to assume there will be a rent increase every year in order to come up with a sustainable HRA business plan anyway. So if we were to not increase rents, that would mean that the HRA business plan wasn't sustainable. And of course, to not agree a rent increase for this financial year for 21-22, that has a long-term impact over the 30-year life of the HRA business plan. It has an impact every year because of that loss of income. So I think they were the factors that Cabinet considered when it came up with its recommendation for Council to increase only social rents by 1.5% and not to increase affordable rents.
Thank you, Mr. Willis. I can't see anybody else indicating members. So can I ask you to just note the report, please? Okay, there's a lot of nodding going on, so that is noted. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Willis, and thank you, Mr. Porter, for your contribution. Agenda item 8, Corporate Performance Report Q1 and Q2 2020-21. Call upon Hannah Thorpe to introduce the item.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members. I'm just going to present my screen. And if I could just have an indication that that's coming across okay.
I can see it okay.
Wonderful. I shall work on the basis it's working for everyone and crack on then. Thank you very much. So I'm here this evening to give you an update on corporate performance for the current year. I'll be splitting this short presentation in two. So, Chairman, I'll be led by you if you'd like to pause after we've considered an update on the current performance and take some questions then before we move on to a brief kind of proposal for the approach for next year. I'll be led by you.
Yeah, I think we should, because we've got them as two separate items. So if we stop at the end of the Q1 and Q2 reports, and then you move on to the future after that. Thank you.
Absolutely, yeah, that makes good sense. Thank you. Okay, so in terms of where we are to date, members will be aware that obviously we were due to do a refresh on the corporate performance framework, and including having new measures, new targets and a whole new approach. That was due to start this year, but unfortunately, as a result of having to refocus the efforts and the workload of the team, unfortunately that's had to be delayed, and we decided rather than kind of bring that about mid-year, we would keep going for this year with the previous performance indicators. So we're still monitoring performance against the previous corporate plan, and the idea being that we will refresh this and bring in new measures which will start for the new financial year on the 1st of April. The positive of that means that we've got an opportunity this evening to have a bit of a discussion about what that approach will be, and then to use your feedback and recommendations to help us come up with hopefully a really good way positive forward. So just going back to the current performance, members will probably be aware, as a result of having to significantly change and refocus efforts as a result of the COVID pandemic, there has been an impact on some of our service provision. In the main, we have still been capturing data on key performance in most areas. There's only 3 measures in this report where data isn't up to date, and I'll explain that when we get to the relevant priority. And it's just worth saying that where we haven't been coming to you on a quarterly basis and reporting the performance update, services are still capturing that data at a local level. So I absolutely need to give you that assurance that that performance is still being monitored. That is something that managers are still keeping a close eye on. We just haven't been coming to the meetings to give you an update in this capacity. In terms of this report, you'll notice obviously it's slightly different than how we did it previously, in that we've only provided commentary against those measures where we're outside of performance. We appreciate that they are the areas probably that scrutiny members are most keen to focus on. So that the purpose of kind of giving a bit of a presentation this evening is to touch on some of the more positive areas also. And in terms of public opinion, ordinarily we would conduct a residence survey on an annual basis in the autumn time, again as a result of my team having to focus efforts in supporting the COVID pandemic. We've had to delay that, and that will now be going out later on this month. It still will be going ahead, and we'll still be capturing that feedback and making sure that we use that to kind of to focus priorities in the future. It'll just be happening at a slightly later date. So in terms of an overview of our overall position, you'll have already seen this within the report, so I won't repeat that in its entirety. I think the point worth noting now is that in terms of the general state of play, this time round, we've got 2 more measures that are below the target compared to when we last presented an update to you, and 2 measures that have dropped and no longer green, so that's at or exceeding our target. I think that context, and given the climate and the kind of the efforts and the additional work that is going on, not only on kind of the COVID efforts, but also in relation to EU transition, I think that's we see that that's quite a positive position. Obviously, you would have expected there to be a slight drop as if we've had to kind of redeploy resources, but generally speaking, things aren't looking too unhealthy. So taking each of the priorities in turn, we have 6 measures that we report on under clean and welcoming environment. The measures within this priority where we're at or exceeding target are around environmental health requests. Household waste that we send for recycling is within target and is still very close to that target, which is positive. And the measure that's below target is around our missed bin collection. Now, the service director has provided an update to explain the context of that within the report itself. The service has been affected by the need to redeploy resources to frontline services at this time. We know that that's had an effect. We've had to have more use of agency staff, which has affected some of the collection rates. And we know that access issues continue to be an issue, not least as we've got a vast majority of people now working at home also. That said, I think it's important to make the context that we say each time that 99.66% of collections are still successful. And we do have the positive of having new vehicles coming on stream in early 2021, the financial year, I should say, sorry. You'll have noticed that I didn't highlight some of the other measures. These are the three performance indicators that we haven't been capturing, and that is around litter, detritus and graffiti. So it's worth making the point that obviously work in this area has still continued, and that is absolutely a priority for us. It's just that the data collection in terms of whether it's at an acceptable level, that hasn't been possible because the team has had to be redeployed to focus on other things. You're probably not overly concerned because this is a measure, or those three measures are things I know that exercise members, because they're not the best in terms of the way that we collate that information, and we're hoping that with the performance report refresh, this is an opportunity to get far more kind of reliable and hopefully helpful data as a result of that. What we've done for the purposes of this report is just to show them with a RAG status that, of where they were on trend for last time. So litter was showing as red, and then graffiti and detritus were at green, and we were just using projections to say if we had been collecting it, we would have expected it to be staying at that level. So I hope that helps to provide that context. In terms of supporting neighbourhoods, we've got 6 measures that we capture, 4 of which are exceeding or at target and 2 which are below. I just wanted to make the point around the measures where we're exceeding target, particularly in relation to homelessness. Members will recall that these were measures that in previous years, not too long ago in fact, where we were quite far outside of target, and thanks to government intervention funding and extremely hard work and dedication from the housing team, we've seen that improve massively. And it's testament to that team that despite all of the things that kind of COVID are throwing at them, that has continued to maintain and reach target. In terms of the measures that are below target, antisocial service requests are something that have been impacted. Again, it's worth making the point, as it's detailed in the report, that that team has been pulled away to focus on the community hub activity and making sure that we're contacting our clinically extremely vulnerable people as well. So that has had a direct impact on the ability to respond to those requests, the general service requests close to target. And in terms of the other housing measure that's below target, having spoken to the landlord manager, I understand that there's still very much enforcement action that's going on. I know that we've served 110 statutory enforcement notices since the beginning of the year, which is still positive. We were expecting this measure to reduce slightly anyway, as our rogue landlord programme ended at the end of March, and the selective licensing scheme is also due to come to an end. So we were kind of profiling that activity would drop off anyway, and obviously again COVID has had an impact. In terms of promoting inward investment, here we measure 3 targets, 2 of which are green and 1 which is red. Just to highlight in relation to the planning applications, the major planning applications, from speaking with our planning applications manager, again, as detailed in the report, the impact here is on legacy planning applications, which are still taking quite a long time to resolve. He's got a new member of the team starting soon, so he's really hopeful that that performance will improve soon. So we're hoping that that's nothing to kind of be overly concerned with. Oh, actually, I was also going to mention, just in relation to this priority, although it's just contextual information, we do obviously within this priority capture those that are economically active. You'll notice at the moment the figure is dropped slightly and then stabilised. As a result of COVID, we would be expecting for that in future months probably to reduce. So we'll be keeping an eye on that. And finally, statistical information. And it's worth noting, because I probably am going to steal some thunder from people that were going to highlight this. The obvious error, for those of you that have spotted, is in relation to the number of starters and leavers. There was an error on the report. We have included in this slide the correct figure, which we had 50 starters and 31 leavers. So we had a net increase of 19, and it's not as stated in the report. That's maths that doesn't quite make sense. So apologies for that. In relation to this measure, we've got 5 that are on target, 2 that are within 5% and 2 that are below. It's worth saying that I'd in fact specifically like to highlight the FOI response. I know that we're still only at amber, but we're just shy of a green. And actually there's been a concerted effort to improve this. Again, members will recall that this has been a measure that's been kind of quite below target for some time. And thanks to a completely refreshed process and really hard work from the team, this is something that's now clawing its way back and doing really well against the target that's set. Council tax collected is also amber, and that is one that we're going to be continuing to watch. As I'm sure you're aware, again, seems to be kind of a theme of the performance report tonight. COVID has obviously had a massive effect on people's ability to pay council tax. We have seen an increased level of council tax support, which we are kind of working hard to support residents with. This is a measure that we are going to continue to review. We're only just off the target at this time, but we would expect, and I believe that it is profiled to be slightly under target by year end as a direct result of what's happening. And in relation to the measures that are below target, sickness days, again, is a measure that's consistently below target, but continues to be moving in the right direction. So we're positive that that will carry on as projected. And business rates is obviously, again, for the same reasons as council tax, is below the projected target for this time of the year. And I believe, yeah, that brings me to a close in terms of a summary of this year's performance. So I'm very happy to pause there and to take any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Hannah. Yeah, thank you very much for that. I do apologise to members as well. I should have announced at the beginning that I was changing the order. So this is actually agenda item 8, but we will be going back to agenda items 5, 6 and 7 afterwards. So members, have anybody got any comments or queries they'd like to make? If not, I've got a couple. I mean, the first thing is that regarding missed bin collections, that shows as red. But in my view, given the pandemic and the old fleet that we've got, a missed collection rate of 0.34% is actually quite good. And I think it feels a bit unfair that that's shown as red, although I'm sure not all members would agree with that. I noticed that the incidence of dumped rubbish on council land has gone up from 134 to 274. So my question is that due to KCC charging for certain types of waste that people may wish to dump? You've already touched on this, Hannah, but talked about action to improve living conditions, and that's very low. And I wondered if maybe Bob could comment on what the prospects are for that figure being improved in the future. And whilst that's a negative, I think it's very impressive, the reductions in time taken to make homeless decisions, and also the real big reduction in the number of days spent in hotel accommodation. I've got a question on the enterprise and employment, numbers of people in employment count. Question is, when was that measured, and how soon will we get another figure so that we can see the full impact of COVID? And my last thing is, you've rightly pointed out, Hannah, I'd also question the maths, but you've got in first, so there we are. So if we take all the questions and then perhaps you can sort of take them off one by one. I've got a question from Councillor Roper. I think you need to unmute.
Yes, hello. Thank you for your report. I have unmuted. Can you hear me?
You come and go a bit, but we can live with that probably.
Right. I'm having problems with my internet.
Right.
Question. Thank you for your report, Hannah. First of all, question on recycling is: who sets the target? Is it the government or is it ourselves? And given the sort of current worries about particularly plastic recycling, could the target be raised, and who would do that? Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Hopkinson, I think you have a question as well.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, thanks for the report, Hannah. I just was interested in, you mentioned the delayed survey is going to happen this month. I just wondered if you could tell us a bit more about it in terms of how many people are going to be asked, how they're selected, and what type of thing you ask them. Thank you.
Thank you. I can't see any more questions, Hannah, so if you'd like to run through those.
I will. It's quite a mammoth list.
Quite short.
We're just in one go. No, it's fine.
You've got to bear in mind, Councillor Campbell's not here tonight, so I mean that saved us at least 20 questions.
That is very true, and he's actually greatly missed. Actually,
Yeah.
okay, I've covered everything. Shout if I do skip anything though, and I also might bring in colleagues as well to assist me on this. So, firstly, in terms of the missed bins, I think it's something that I say probably at each performance report update that I give, that the target that we set around that is highly ambitious and was deliberately so at that time. We do believe that when it comes to reviewing our targets for next year, that there could be a better way of compiling this data. One of the things that we're really keen to see is, because you're exactly right, actually the collection rate itself is pretty impressive, but if you're one of the residents that's subject to being missed, then actually you'd be pretty miffed, and quite rightly so. And I think one of the things that we want to look at is actually, I think most people can accept if there's a one-off missed bin, there's always going to be the nature of the job, the case that there could be an occasion when that happens. What we want to understand is using data to see if we've got consistent issues in different areas. So what we'll be doing with our kind of new way of working is trying to use geographical data to layer that on top of the performance to see if we can then target areas. So if we know that there's consistently issues with access in a particular road, we can do some campaigning around that. If it's an issue with people not knowing when to put their bins out, we can target some education activity around that. So we want to be able to use intelligence to target that, in a much better way. I don't know, Mike Humbert is on the line. I didn't know whether he wanted to jump in at this point and say anything in relation to that, and also in relation to your comment around dumped rubbish as well.
Hi there. Yes, is that okay, Chair? I'll come in there. Yeah. So on bins, I think Hannah is absolutely right. This year has been particularly hard on the crews, particularly in terms of having to bring in agency staff and sort of maintaining bubbles. And the crews are out every day and they work together closely, and compounding that with bringing in agency staff to cover staff who are shielding or self-isolating. We also have the issue that lots of people are working from home, and our large freighters, they're 26-ton refuse collection vehicles, do have trouble getting down narrow streets when there's cars parked on both sides. But despite all of that, we're still managing that 99.66% figure. So I think I'm certainly sort of proud of the crew's achievements this year, and managing to keep a pretty consistent service. One other thing, which it is in the notes there, but in order to ease the number of crew in the cabs, we're collecting food waste separately and still doing that. So that means again, it's more work. So we have to, we need more staff to be able to do that. But it's something that we're doing, in the interest of the welfare of our teams. In terms of dumped rubbish, I think I'll need to go away and get some information on that, particularly from some enforcement colleagues. But I will say that certainly we've noticed that the weight of residual waste is up this year. It's significantly higher, and we think that that's a result of people being at home, doing more DIY, doing more clearing out the loft, those sort of things. And I think certainly the fact that the HWRCs, the household waste sites, were closed for a period, and now they're open, obviously with a bookable service. But I think it's fair to say that their usage is down, and and our residual is up. So there is there's a sort of comparison to draw there, and certainly I think that you can also look at what's going on out in the environment, and the effect on the increase on dumped rubbish is also linked, I think, with all of that.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. I had living conditions as the next point. So Bob, do you mind if I bring you in to add anything further around that.
Thank you, Hannah. Yeah, that's absolutely fine. I think the chair asked about the prospects for the future in terms of this indicator.
That's right.
I think there's a couple of things to say. First of all, we did anticipate that the numbers would drop off during this year, and that's partly because of the rogue landlord project that was funded by central government coming to an end, and also selective licensing. And the selective licensing designation ends on the 19th of April. There is good news in that, though, in that any property that has a license issued during the designation period, that license is still valid for the full 5 years. So even if we issue a license on the 18th of April, 2021, it's valid until the 18th of April, 2026. And if at any point during that 5-year period, the landlord fails to meet the requirements of the license, then we can take action to either impose a fine or prosecute for that particular property and require work to be done. So there is a gap in selective licensing, but there's still tools there for us to use to bring around prosecutions and improvements. The other key question in this about the future really is what we do next about selective licensing. As officers, we've been exploring what a new designation for selective licensing might look like, and we've got the first meeting of the new Housing Cabinet Advisory Group coming up later in the week to look at a work programme, and that work programme is proposed to include a review of the options for the future of selective licensing. And we've had early discussions with the MHCLG about the potential for new selective licensing designations, and they have been supportive and open to hear our proposals about that. So I think there's reason to be optimistic about the options for the council to designate a new selective licensing area and use that as a tool to see increases in this indicator area in the future.
Thank you, Bob. Hannah, back to you.
Thank you very much. The next question was around the employment count. So this is NOMIS data that's provided, so it's not data that the council holds locally. I'm not sure on the frequency, but I have asked our expert. Oh, it's quarterly. Thank you very much, Nathaniel. So that's quarterly data from NOMIS. And yes, it is something that we will actively be keeping an eye on because we do expect there to be an impact as a result of that. Councillor Roper's question in relation to recycling and who sets the target, that's set by ourselves. And it's the hardest of either our previous activity or previous targets or benchmark data against other authorities. We obviously will be using, again, this refresh as an opportunity to review that. And one of the desires with this is to kind of look at a whole host of other information around that into people's recycling habits and be able to kind of review which kind of streams seem to be more effective, and if there are a way that we can target kind of campaigns and communications to try to improve that. So we're seeing that this refresh is a good opportunity to do that. And then I believe that the final question was in relation to the residents survey. So that is due to go out the last week of January, so very shortly. We're due to follow exactly the same methodology as we have in previous years. So we send to a random sample of 6,000 residents. It's random to an extent. However, we do profile it by postcode area so that we try to get an equal distribution of percentage of residents that live within each of the different areas as far as possible. We select those 6,000 at random. We send them a postcard. They're given an online code, which they then must use to register to be able to do that online. We do give hard copy surveys for anybody that's not able to access the internet or finds that a difficult process, so we do support that also. It will be open for a period of 3 weeks. Depending on the take-up, will depend on whether or not we issue any kind of reminder communications. But take-up has increased year on year in the past few years. I don't know whether, again, because of the pandemic, whether that will influence people in terms of their desire to complete a council survey or not. I'm not sure, but obviously we'll be doing all we can to try to encourage that because it is a good opportunity to benchmark, and we will broadly be keeping the questions in line with previous years. Again, we had grand aspirations last year to do a complete wholesale refresh around this. It's just not the right time, and I think it will be more helpful just to get a good indicator of how we're comparing year on year, to be honest with you. So that's the plan.
Okay, thank you. I noticed in the chat, Councillor Keane is asking what the general response rate is to the survey.
You're putting me on the spot because I don't have access to the figures, but I'm pretty certain that we hover between 10 to 12%. Now, that probably sounds really awful. In industry standards, that's considered good. So actually, and like I say, year upon year, it has gone up and we get more interaction and engagement. So that's a positive thing. But obviously, we'll be doing all we can to try to push that even further.
Okay.
And I'm very happy to share a copy of that, of the questions as well with members. I think that would be really good. Absolutely.
Fantastic. That's really good. I think final councillor on this, Councillor Curry, you've got a question.
Thank you, Chair. Hannah, I was wondering, has public feedback and inquiries increased during the past year and during lockdowns, and which have been the main areas of concern?
It's a really good question, and I wish I had the answer. It's worth just kind of capturing, because I'm not sure I made it really clear. The data that we're presenting on today is year to date from April up until September. So it's kind of capturing that first part of the year. I don't have that data to hand, but it is something that we do monitor, and I would very easily be able to get that and to share that with you from customer services perspective. And I can either share that before the next meeting or at the next meeting, whichever is easier.
Yeah, the next meeting will be fine. Thanks, Hannah.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I can't see any other councillors indicating. So this is agenda item 8. Can I ask members to note the comments that have been made, and for officers to note the comments that we've made? Thank you. Okay, thank you. Right, back to the proper order now. But Hannah, you're still on. So agenda item 5, proposal for new look corporate performance reporting format. Over to you.
Lovely, thank you. And I shall again just jump back into my presentation. So again, working on the presumption that everybody can see what I'm looking at, I will get us going. So in terms of our approach to performance in the future, I should probably just say initially that the purpose of this part of the discussion is around sharing the principles and the approach that we'd like to take. We haven't been as bold as actually establishing the measures and kind of racing ahead with that. We thought actually that a better starting point would be to give you an overview of where we're at, what our aspirations are, what our hopes are, how we plan to deliver on that. Check that you're comfortable as a scrutiny panel that we're heading in the right direction, and then we'll go away, continue to have meetings with the services, and bring back to a future meeting, albeit before April, our proposed detailed plan around performance. So I hope that, as a starting point, is acceptable to you all.
Yeah.
So in terms of what we're hoping to do, obviously the whole purpose of our performance monitoring is to make sure that we're keeping track against our corporate statement. So members will be aware that the 3 corporate key objectives for the council are in relation to growth, environment and communities. So any performance reporting that we do in the future will link directly back to that to demonstrate to residents and to demonstrate to you that we are achieving against our core objectives. The other thing that we really want to do is to make sure that we're focusing on the things that matter most to residents. I'm not too certain of the 40 indicators that we present to you this evening, how many of those really mean a lot to the general public. And it's our kind of passion that we want to make sure that the information that we give to residents, to make sure it's as engaging as it can be, that it focuses on the things that we know matter most. And one of the key ways of doing that will be tying it in with the feedback of the resident survey. So we know consistently over the last 4 years, residents tell us that keeping the streets clean, that keeping the streets safe, and that thriving towns are the 3 areas that matter most. So I think in which case we need to make sure that our performance data reflects and reports on those things. It seems to make most sense. We're really, really hopeful that our new refreshed way of working will be transparent and it will be engaging. I've got a colleague here, Nathaniel, who I'll introduce you to in a moment. We're really sad and we find this really exciting, and we think there's a lot of opportunity to get people engaged and fired up and wanting to keep track of how we're doing as a council. So the way in which we propose to do that is, number one, reducing the number of indicators that we include in the report. Now, I'm really keen to make sure that that doesn't mean that that's kind of less access and less transparency for people. In fact, what we want to do is scale back on the number that we present on, but provide far more context and far better quality of data that supports each of those. So picking recycling, for example, rather than just show you a kind of innocuous graph that shows a line that kind of goes like this, we want to really understand the information and the data behind that. So we want to understand, is it, card and paper that is performing really well? Are we seeing an increase in glass and bottles being recycled? Is there a reason behind people's reluctance to kind of, get on board with recycling certain things? We want to be able to give you far more access to information so you can then interrogate us with more confidence in return. And the final thing that we're proposing to do, which is quite scary, but we think it's the right thing, is any of the indicators we want to report live on our website. So there's far less reliance on bringing these quarterly reports and people waiting for data that then by the time you see it, case in point today, we're talking about data up to September, we're now quite out of date. Our vision with the way that we will bring this to you in the future is to make sure that we've got live, up-to-date, current information that can be accessed at any time on our website. So in terms of what we're going to continue to measure, I'm hoping I get endorsement from you, but as far as we're concerned, this is non-negotiable. The things that we are currently reporting on that we think we absolutely must continue to report on, albeit maybe in a slightly different way and with new targets, is the list that's in front of you now. So recycling, street cleansing, homelessness, business rates and council tax collection. And in terms of the way that we want to present this, as I've said, we want this to be 24 hours and available on the website. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop presenting momentarily and I'm going to hand you over to my colleague Nathaniel. Nathaniel Fisher works in the digital team. He's our business analyst. I'm sure many of you will have met him before. He's just going to talk you through a concept using recycling as an example of the kind of level and quality of data that we want to be able to share on the website. So Nathaniel, over to you.
Thank you, Hannah. As Hannah said, we're quite excited that this is a new way of reporting, making it more accessible, more transparent to residents and councillors. Recycling is an example that at the moment we kind of drip feed you with what the recycling rate is, and then you have to ask questions to get more details. We want to make it that you can see the different streams of recycling under there. You can see how performance is. So instead of asking, is it because there's an increase in waste, as I think Mike mentioned earlier, that you can actually see that detail and don't have to wait for 4 reports a year, which will hopefully have better questions, better recommendations, and a better use of your time too, that we can tackle those problems that are important to residents. And this one I find quite interesting, that since COVID, an increase in plastic and glass. I don't know if it's because everybody's drinking a little bit more, but that kind of thing isn't something that you would see necessarily on just a recycling rate measure. So we're excited about it, and hopefully there's a bit of excitement from yourselves as well, that this is the way that we should be presenting and being more transparent with the data.
Okay.
Thank you, Nathaniel. I just had one final slide. I won't bother kind of resharing it, I'll just read that. So what we're after today, if possible, is to get approval from scrutiny members on our proposed approach. Appreciating that this obviously isn't a finished package. This is very much just the kind of the direction of travel that we'd like to go in. We'd like to take this forward with any recommendations from yourself, and that can either be this evening or I'm happy for members to go away to kind of mull it over and to email things over the next couple of weeks to Nathaniel or myself. We're going to then, and we've actually already started to meet with the different service areas to agree what we think is an acceptable indicator, how we propose that we're going to report on that, and what the target is going to be. And again, all of this we then want to come back and share with you. Our proposal is to come back to a scrutiny meeting, preferably before the 1st of April, to run through that detail, to check that you think that that is the right way forward, and then we can start implementing that from the start of the new financial year. And that was it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Hannah and Nathaniel, for your presentation. You've touched on it really. I mean, I think it's been sprung on members a bit tonight, so I don't think we can do any more than give you sort of general agreement and encouragement. You've suggested that members sort of send you their thoughts. To aid that, would you send the presentation to all members of the panel, please, so that they've got them to check on? And yes, I think it's imperative that you do come back to a meeting before the 1st of April, because it would be good to start from then if we could. I can't see any comments from members. So are you happy to accept the proposal that slides are shared, that you send any ideas and thoughts that you've got to Hannah, and that Hannah and Nathaniel come back to a meeting well before the 1st of April with final proposals for going forward? So I'll move that from the chair. Does that find a seconder?
Yeah, I'll second that, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Coleman-Cook. Members, is that agreed? Okay, everybody's nodding. No, nobody's shaking their heads. So once again, thank you, Hannah and Nathaniel, for that, and thank you, members. And we'll move on. Thank you very much. Agenda item 6, Memorials Working Party update report. I'll now ask Councillor Piper to give the panel an update on the work of the Memorials Working Party. Councillor Reverend Piper, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. Happy New Year to everybody. Mr. Chairman, we last reported to you on the 27th of October. Since then, we've had a further meeting on the 25th of November. The details of that are included in the report that Mr. Charles Hungway has prepared for us, and our thanks to him as a working party for his admin support all the way through this. Our aim, just to remind members, is to produce a workable policy document for Council's consideration. And there's just a couple of comments I'd like to make on page 3 of this report, beginning at paragraph 2.0. It talks about the current situation and highlights a number of areas of discussion that the working party had. We were joined by a guest, Mr. Chris Nicholas, who'd contributed earlier as well. Points that particularly were noted was that we can't change the history that we had, but we can educate and learn for the future. And there is a need to be honest about our past in all of these things. There were a couple of recommendations made that we note that Liverpool City Council have made a lot more progress than most councils in the country. That was correct at the time of preparing this. And that we could perhaps seek to learn from them. I have had a little bit of a look at what Liverpool Council have been up to. And, they've taken a bold and courageous step, I think, in some cases, in some of the things that they've done. But just one example was the naming of a street sign, which was defaced several times and quite badly, and it was called Penny Lane. There was some concern that Penny Lane was named after James Penny, who was a slave trader, and that's where people would go to buy their penny slaves. Therefore, people wanted it removed. The council had a look at it, the museum had a look at it, and in fact, they decided that they couldn't be absolutely certain that Penny Lane, though it had been there since round about that time, had anything to do with Mr. James Penny. And they were rather more concerned with the fact that Penny Lane is associated with the Beatles and a very famous song that most of us, well, at least some of us anyway, are old enough to remember being released. Yeah. So the mayor of Liverpool took the firm decision that it would not be removed. It would no longer be acceptable to deface it. And so for the moment, Penny Lane remains as it is. And the museum are going to have a look at the history that they place around that particular monument. And if I may, Chairman, there's something that came out on the 17th of January of this year from Community Secretary Robert Jenrick, which has a bearing on what we're trying to do. he has announced changes in the law to protect public statues and monuments. He said people should have the chance to be consulted and whether or not any monument should stand or be removed. And he says things that have stood for generations should be considered thoughtfully, not removed on a whim or at the behest of a baying mob, and proper process will now be required. Hence, whatever programme or policy we produce as a council into how we do things, he says any decisions to remove heritage assets will require planning permission, and councils will need to do so in accordance with their constitution after consultation with the local community. However, he says the Secretary of State will retain the right of veto power, which could be used to overrule any local decisions. So as a working party, we're now looking to our lead officer to produce the document, which we can then bring back to you. But that's just something very recent that's come into the mix in terms of how we consider how that document will be put together. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Piper. Thank you for that and the report that Charles produced and for your very up-to-date update. Very impressive. So thank you. I can't see any comments or questions, members. Oh, Councillor Hopkinson, sorry.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Piper. I noted you said in 2.2, where it's about the 6th bullet point, that council should consider new and proposed statues and memorials. I mean, the reason I flag this up is, I mean, that's great to see. Basically, I have a suggestion for one, and I wonder if there's a sort of mechanism for being able to, I don't know, who should I address that suggestion to and how?
I haven't a clue, Councillor Hopkins. I don't know whether the council.
Sorry, I meant to address that to Councillor Piper. I mean, perhaps I can email you as chair of the committee for it to be discussed.
Yes, thank you. But in brief, it would be that before, for example, giving approval for the George IV statue to be erected in Ramsgate, which is planned for this year, due consideration should be given to historical significance, the views of members of the public. Just in case people aren't aware, Ramsgate Town Council have agreed to accept the statue as a gift from the creator and the team. You may or may not be aware that the sculptor died very recently, so the statue is being cared for by others. But the town council have agreed to look after it, assuming it arrives and is installed and so on. But if there's a violent public objection to it, then that's something the councils and certainly TDC, we will have to have a look at it. But if you want to email me any particular questions as chair of that group, I'd be very happy to include them in the discussions for the next meeting.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Piper. I can't see anybody else indicating to speak, members. So can I ask members to note the report, and thank you, Councillor Piper.
You're welcome.
Lots of nodding going on, so the report is duly noted. Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 7, tenant and leaseholder services transition update. I call upon Bob Porter and Sally O'Sullivan to introduce the item.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. Thank you for the time on the agenda this evening. I want to run through some of the key issues that the report includes. But before I do that, I just wanted to share with you that Sally O'Sullivan, our Tenant and Leaseholder Services Manager, is also in the meeting, as is Councillor Whitehead, who's the Cabinet Member for Housing and Communities. And Councillor Whitehead has participated in our liaison meetings with tenants and leaseholders and had a considerable amount of contact with tenants and leaseholders over the recent months since transition. The last report that we presented to you about the service was on the 27th of August, 5 weeks before the go live date on the 1st of October. And this is the first opportunity really we've had to let you know how things have been going since the 1st of October. We're 15 weeks into the new service, including the Christmas break. So it's still all relatively new, but the team have settled in really well, I'm pleased to be able to say. we've got 58 posts in the new structure, and only 4 vacancies in total. 3 of those currently covered by agency staff, and 1 that we're going to go to recruitment to soon. So in terms of recruitment, I think we've done really well over that period to get a full team of officers together. Of those 58 posts, 28 officers came over from East Kent Housing on a TUPE-like transfer from EKH to TDC, and the remaining posts are all new appointments, new to the authority, new to the area. We've introduced new contact arrangements for the service, new email contacts. You may well have seen that in the loop, the myhome@thanet.gov.uk, which is an email address we've shared with every tenant and leaseholder as a way to contact us, get straight through the team. We sent out a newsletter in the very first week of the service, and that newsletter included a fridge magnet for everybody with contact details of how to contact the service, including that email address and our telephone number. And we've also introduced new generic neighbourhood housing officers, which was something that we really knew tenants and leaseholders wanted us to do, have a generic officer that was responsible for their neighbourhood, that could lead on resolving issues for them when they arose, and a named person that they could contact. And our newsletters going out to tenants and leaseholders have included the names of those neighbourhood officers. During the first 15 weeks or so, we have dealt with a lot of legacy issues that were handed over on transition from East Kent Housing, but we've had relatively few new complaints from tenants and leaseholders, which I think indicates that the new contact arrangements for the service are working well, and that people can get through to the officer they need to speak to generally when they need to. The report itself is in 3 parts. So we've tried to give you as much information as we can about where we are, and about the scale of the work that we need to do to improve the service and get it to where we want it to be. So we've included an overall position statement on the first two months. We've included an update on health and safety, particularly because health and safety is such a key priority, and I will say a little more about that in a minute. And we've also included the performance data for the first 2-month period from the 1st of October to the end of November. Generally, going forward, we'll report performance along with the corporate performance on the same sort of cycle, and agree through Hannah's process what the key indicators are that you want to see regularly. But over the first period, whilst we're working on improving the service and embedding it, we'll try and give you as much information as we can about where we are. So on health and safety, during the first 2-month period, we've been meeting regularly with the regulator for social housing. Before transition, that was a process that was being done jointly with all 4 councils, but it's now separated out, and we meet the regulator as Thanet District Council representing our new service. And the regulator has agreed our voluntary undertaking, an action plan for tackling issues around tenant and leaseholder health and safety. That action plan has actions up until April of this year. And at this point, I'm pleased to be able to say that we're broadly delivering in line with that action plan, and anticipate to be at a position in April where we could say it's business as usual in relation to tenant and leaseholder health and safety. We then plan to have the East Kent Audit Partnership review where we are on health and safety in May, reporting back to the regulator in June, when we hope to be able to say that they've removed the regulatory notice on the council in relation to those issues. In the health and safety report, I thought it might be worth just picking out a couple of the key things. The first one is in relation to gas safety, which was probably the first identified problem in relation to health and safety some 18 months ago. and I'm very pleased to be able to say that the position in relation to gas safety is currently very positive. At the last review of the data, we had one property that didn't have a current gas safety certificate, and that was the case where the resident was refusing access to the engineers to carry out the work. We're in the process of working with other agencies to resolve that. Probably our biggest concern on transition related to electrical compliance, and you'll see in the figures which are quite low. We, in transition, and we've discussed this with the regulator, we had very limited confidence in the data that came over from East Kent Housing. And so the team have completed a line-by-line review of all of the safety certificates in relation to electrical safety for both domestic dwellings and communal areas. And in the report, obviously the report is based on the end of November position. It says we'll complete that work by the end of December, and we did in fact complete that work by the end of December. And since that time, the level of compliance for electrical safety has increased. We expect it to increase further over the coming months. In relation to health and safety, we are reviewing the position monthly. We're reporting the position monthly to the regulator for social housing, and our newly adopted policies include formal reporting to members here and at Cabinet on a quarterly basis. I think the second area to highlight is capital programme. And when we took over the service on the 1st of October, the position in relation to the capital programme was very challenging. I think we touched on this in the earlier report on the budget. We are anticipating a significant amount of slippage from this year into next year in relation to the capital programme. And actually on the 1st of October, only 13% of this year's allocation had been spent. We're working very hard to get projections for the end of the year for the capital programme, but that has proved to be quite a difficult task for a couple of reasons. Firstly, we identified quite a large number of coding errors with revenue expenditure against capital codes and capital expenditure against revenue codes, which the team have been working through systematically. And we also identified a large number of late and delayed invoices, which we've also now checked off and processed through the system. There is some good news on capital programme. So although we've got a long way to go and there's a lot of procurement work to do, we have had some early success with procuring new contracts in a number of areas. So we're now in contract with for external decorations and repairs, a contract that's been desperately needed for a very long time. And we've also let a contract for the refurbishment of 14 lifts in our 6 tower blocks and a couple of other blocks as well. And finally, we've also let a contract for structural and mechanical surveys of the 6 tower blocks. And that survey work will also include providing advice about other works that are needed, including external cladding, and helping us with the procurement for any works that come out of those that piece of work. The performance report itself does highlight some areas that I would identify as needing improvement. Satisfaction with repairs, probably the thing that most impacts our tenants and leaseholders. And we've worked hard over the first couple of months to improve the relationships with our key contractors, Gascall and Mears, implement new contract management arrangements, and new ways of improving and monitoring the service. Also, void performance and rent collection, I think we also identified as areas that particularly need improvement over the coming months, particularly to support the business plan for the future. Just say a little bit about communications, because as well as meeting our tenant and leaseholder representatives, we've sent out a number of newsletters since the service started. So one in the first week, January, and we've sent out bespoke newsletters to each of the 6 tower blocks, letting tenants there know specific information about their own tower block. In the most recent newsletter, we've included a survey about residents' priorities for improvements over the coming 12 to 18 months. And we've already seen a good response to that survey. We want to use the results of the survey to help us put together an improvement plan for that period, which we will then take through both the Housing Cabinet Advisory Group and also bring updates here for discussion with our progress against that improvement plan. So in summary, what I'd say is I think the service has made a really good start in quite challenging circumstances, both with the issues that we uncovered on transfer, but also, of course, we've had COVID and difficulties with home visits and inspections during that period. The team have settled in really well and are already showing that they can resolve problems that had previously been outstanding for some time. And in Appendix 4, there's a table there with some real examples of some of the problems that we've uncovered and tackled and resolved for people. So I think that's probably all I want to say by way of introduction. As I say, myself, Sally O'Sullivan and Councillor Whitehead are all here if members have any questions.
Okay, thank you, Bob. It's very, very comprehensive report, much appreciated. And you know, both your verbal report and the written report that we've had. In fact, I can't see any members wishing to raise any questions at the moment. Oh yeah, Councillor Boyd has got a question.
Thank you. Thank you for your report, Bob. It was just a quick question with regards to the capital programme and the miscoding. Has it been established to how that happened? And also, more importantly, is there now something in place to stop that ever happening again and moving forward?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch the first part of that question. Are you talking about the timescale and the delay? Is that what the question's about?
No, so the capital programme, the miscoding.
Oh, okay. Yes. Yeah. Well, I think the reason for that, I mean, it's easy, isn't it, to blame the previous organisation, isn't it? But I think fundamentally the issues there were about a lack of understanding amongst the officers raising those jobs about how the coding structure worked. And in particular, and I think this is something that applied across the way East Kent Housing previously delivered services, not having identified lead officers and clear lines of responsibility for pieces of work or neighbourhoods or particular contracts. And that is something that we've worked really hard to make sure we overcome. And every contract now has a named lead officer, contract administrator, their responsibilities for ensuring that the invoices are coded and the orders are coded in the right way against the coding structure. So I feel much more confident that going forward we won't see those sorts of miscodings that we've uncovered.
Thank you, Bob. I can't see any members indicating. So if that's the case, can we note the report, members, please? Yeah, everybody's nodding, so thank you very much. Moving on, agenda item 9, review of the OSP work programme. Members are invited to either comment or simply note the report. I see no comments, so can we note that report, please? Thank you. And finally, agenda item 10, forward plan exempt cabinet report list for period 9th of December 2020 to 31st of May. Unless there's something from the plan the panel would wish to consider, members are asked to note the report. Again, everybody's nodding. And as my machine is indicating that I've got just 2 minutes left, the timing couldn't be better. So can I thank everybody for participation this evening, anybody that's watching the live stream. Thank you.